It was the kind of vacation I had dreamed of for months. My name is Ethan, and I work as a freelance writer. My schedule is flexible, so I decided to take a week off, explore the quieter parts of the country, and rent a secluded cabin through Airbnb. I had spent countless hours scrolling through listings, but one place caught my attention. A cabin deep in the woods of Oregon, surrounded by nothing but trees. The listing had only a few reviews, but they were glowing, too glowing. That should have been my first warning. I arrived at the cabin late in the afternoon. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. The driveway was narrow and overgrown, barely wide enough for my car. I parked and grabbed my bag, walking up the worn steps to the porch. The place looked exactly like the photos, rustic, cozy, and isolated. I entered the cabin, and the first thing that hit me was the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was unnervingly silent. The kind of silence that presses against your ears, like the world has decided to hold its breath. I noticed a note on the coffee table, addressed to me. "Welcome, Ethan. Make yourself at home. Please text me if you need anything. Adam." Adam was the host, but something about the note felt off. The handwriting was too neat, too perfect. But I brushed it off. After all, it was just a note. I unpacked and settled in, deciding to take a walk around the property to clear my head. As I stepped outside, I noticed something odd. The woods stretched endlessly in every direction, but there was something else, something in the trees. Movement, just beyond the line of sight. At first, I thought it was an animal, but there was a stillness in the way it moved, like it wasn't natural. I tried to shake it off and continued my walk, but the feeling didn't go away. Every snap of a twig underfoot sent my heart racing. By the time I returned to the cabin, the sun had set. The air had turned colder, and the light from the cabin's windows felt like a small, fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, felt amplified. I got up to grab some water, and as I passed the front door, I noticed something on the porch. A figure, standing still, staring into the cabin. My heart dropped into my stomach. I froze, my mind racing. Was it Adam? Maybe he had come to check in? But I hadn't heard a car, and the figure was too still, too rigid. Slowly, I backed away from the door and moved to the window. The figure was still there, unmoving, like it was waiting for something or someone. It was then that I heard it, a faint tapping on the window. Slowly, I turned to face the glass, my breath catching in my throat. The figure wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at the empty space where the figure had been. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath shallow, and all the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The cabin, which had once felt so serene, now seemed to close in on me. I quickly checked all the doors and windows locked. Everything was in its place, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I could almost feel someone just behind me, their presence a weight in the room. Trying to rationalize it, I told myself it was probably just a trick of the mind. Maybe a shadow from the trees outside had played some cruel joke on my senses. After all, I was alone in an isolated cabin, miles from the nearest neighbor. The solitude, the silence, it could mess with anyone's perception. But then I heard it again, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the window. This time, it wasn't just faint. It was louder, more deliberate. I slowly turned towards the source of the sound, dread crawling up my spine. There, on the other side of the glass, I saw him again, the figure. But this time, he was closer, pressed right against the window, his face obscured by the darkness. All I could make out were the faintest hints of his outline, his silhouette so still it was almost as if he was part of the night itself. I froze, my mind trying to catch up with what I was seeing. The figure didn't move, didn't even blink. He was just there, watching, waiting. And then, as if it had been rehearsed, the figure took a step back, and the window fogged up. A single word was written on the glass. It appeared slowly, as though being drawn by an invisible hand. "Come." I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. I should have called the police, I should have left. But for some reason, I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed by a deep, gut-wrenching fear. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at the word that was now beginning to fade away. But then, another sound, a scraping, a slow, deliberate dragging sound, coming from inside the cabin. I whipped around, but there was nothing. The house was empty, still. Then the door to the bedroom opened on its own. The door had been shut tightly before. A cold wind washed over me, chilling me to the bone, and the voice I had been dreading to hear filled the room. It was low, almost a whisper, like a rasping breath in my ear. "I've been waiting for you." It was coming from the other side of the room, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I don't know what drove me to do it, but in that moment of pure terror, I found myself moving toward the open door. I wasn't sure if I was curious or just desperate to find the source of the voice, but I couldn't stay still. Every muscle in my body was screaming for me to run, but I forced myself to take another step, then another. I approached the bedroom slowly, my heart thumping louder in my ears with each passing second. The door was wide open now, swinging slightly with the wind. There was no one in sight. Nothing. Just darkness. I reached for the light switch, but as my hand hovered over it, I felt the air shift, thicker, colder, almost suffocating. The temperature seemed to drop as the shadow in the corner of the room grew longer, twisting unnaturally as though it was alive. My breath caught in my throat. I turned quickly, nearly tripping over my own feet, and rushed to the other side of the cabin where the stairs led down to the basement. I hadn't noticed them when I first arrived. There was something off about this place from the start, but now I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. The basement door creaked open, as if inviting me down into whatever nightmare waited beneath. I didn't want to go, not at all, but I felt this pull in my chest, like some invisible hand was dragging me closer. My feet moved on their own as I descended the stairs, each step echoing through the silence of the house. I finally reached the bottom, and the air felt heavy, damp, stale. A low, ominous hum buzzed in my ears. I pulled out my phone, trying to use the light, but it flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. That's when I saw it. A small, old mirror leaned against the far wall. Its surface was cracked, the edges darkened with age. I could see my reflection in it, my face pale, my eyes wide with fear. But then something else, something behind me. It was the figure. He was standing there, motionless, just behind me. His face was still shrouded in shadow, but I could see the outline of his features, the shape of his eyes, the hollow spaces where his mouth should have been. And then, slowly, the faintest of smiles curled up his lips. It was the kind of smile that no human could ever make. I spun around in a panic, but the room was empty. No one was there. I whipped back toward the mirror, my breath caught in my throat. His reflection was still there, watching me, waiting. "You shouldn't have come," the voice whispered, this time coming from all directions at once. It sounded like the walls themselves were speaking. The light from my phone died, plunging me into complete darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for the stairs, my hands slick with sweat. Every step up felt heavier, like the weight of something was pulling me back down into the abyss. I reached the top, slamming the basement door shut behind me, breathing heavily. I ran to the front door, but just before I could grab the handle, I stopped. There, in the reflection of the window, I saw him again. The figure standing right behind me, as if he had never left. And that's when it hit me. Adam hadn't been my host at all. There was no Adam. There was never an Adam. The name was just another part of the trap, another layer of the lie. The cabin wasn't meant for guests. It was meant for him. I didn't know what to do anymore. My head was spinning. The fear that gripped me was so intense it felt like a physical presence, suffocating me. I stood frozen in place, my hand hovering over the door handle, the figure's reflection glaring back at me from the glass. My mind raced. I needed to leave. I had to get out, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I felt like I was paralyzed, unable to escape whatever dark force had a hold on this place. The sound of footsteps behind me jolted me out of my stupor. I spun around, expecting to see the figure standing there, but no one was there. The air in the cabin had thickened, and the silence was deafening. There were no sounds, no birds, no wind, not even the soft hum of electricity. It was as if the world itself had gone mute and I was completely alone with whatever this was. And then, from the other side of the room, I heard it. A voice. Not the one I had been hearing before, but something different, more familiar, something I could place. It was soft, almost kind, but there was something deeply wrong about it. "Ethan, don't you remember me?" I turned slowly, my stomach churning with dread. The voice sounded like someone I should know, but I couldn't place it. I blinked, trying to focus, but the figure had moved closer, emerging from the shadows like a phantom. This time, the outline was clearer, no longer a vague silhouette, but a man with an all-too-familiar face. It was Adam, except, the more I looked at him, the more I realized something was terribly off. His eyes were too wide, his skin too pale, his mouth too thin. His face had a coldness to it that made my skin crawl. This wasn't the man I had imagined. It was something else entirely. "Who are you?" I choked out, the words barely escaping my throat. Adam's lips twisted into that same grotesque smile. "I told you," he whispered. "I've been waiting for you." Suddenly, memories, strange, disjointed flashes, began to flood my mind. I remembered the cabin listing, the name Adam, the note on the coffee table. But nothing had made sense before. The truth was buried under layers of deception. The real horror hit me all at once. Adam wasn't the host. He was the one who had been here before. He had never left. This cabin wasn't a vacation rental. It was a trap, a prison. Adam, or whatever he was, had been waiting for someone like me, someone who would be foolish enough to step into his world. The Airbnb listing was just a lure, a way to bring in new victims. He had been here, in this house, for years, a twisted, unholy occupant, feeding off the fear of those who dared to rent the cabin. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps, as Adam took another step forward. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with an overwhelming sense of dread. I could feel the air grow colder, the darkness pressing in on me like a living thing. And then, in a voice that was no longer his own, that same voice whispered again, "You will never leave." I screamed, turning to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The cabin itself seemed to be holding me in place, trapping me within its walls. The door wouldn't budge, and every time I tried to break free, I was drawn back into the darkness, into the suffocating silence of the cabin. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, drawing nearer, and the whispered words that haunted me to this day, "You're mine now." I woke up in the same bed I had thought I'd left behind. The same dark wood, the same linen, the same cold air creeping through the cracks in the walls. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but my head felt heavy, like it was submerged underwater. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a nightmare brought on by too much stress, too much isolation. But then I looked around. Nothing had changed. The room was the same, the air the same, the oppressive silence just as thick. I was still in the cabin. The last thing I remembered was the voice, Adam's twisted whisper, and then darkness. Now I was back, lying in the bed as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I felt it. The air had a palpable weight to it, like something invisible was pressing against me. I wasn't alone. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaky, my mind fogged with confusion. The house seemed too quiet, too still, unnatural. I could still hear the faint echo of those whispered words in my ears. "You're mine now." I hurried to the front door, desperate to escape, but the door didn't open. It was as if it had fused with the walls, refusing to move. I pulled at the handle, throwing my weight against it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. But why? I had never locked it. My chest tightened as I turned, panic creeping into my veins. It was then I noticed the shadows. The same figures I had seen before, those dark, indistinct shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of sight, were now standing at the edges of the room, watching me. And Adam? He was there too. He stood motionless in the doorway, smiling that twisted smile I would never forget. His eyes were dark, hollow, and he was no longer the man I thought I had seen. There was something else about him now, something far darker, something that made the room feel colder. His presence, it radiated evil. "You can't leave," he said, his voice low and breathless. "No one leaves. Not from here. Not from me." I backed away, my hands shaking, my legs trembling beneath me. I had to get out. I had to survive. But deep down, I knew something, knew it with a terrifying certainty. The cabin wasn't just a house. It was alive, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. It was feeding on me, on my fear. I turned, my eyes scanning for a way out. The windows. Maybe if I could break one, I could escape. But as I looked at the windows, I realized something worse. There were no windows. They had vanished, replaced by smooth, solid walls. The house had changed. No. The walls were closing in, the floorboards groaning as though something beneath them was moving. The entire structure seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. I could hear faint whispers, disjointed words, voices from the past, all blending together in a chaotic chorus. The basement door. I had to get to the basement. I bolted down the hallway, not looking back. I didn't know what I was running from, but I couldn't stop myself. I reached the door that led down into the dark, the only place that felt like it might hold some clue to what was really going on. But as my hand touched the doorknob, I heard Adam's voice again, right behind me. "You're too late." I swung the door open, rushing down the stairs, and that's when I saw it. The mirror, the one I had seen before, the one that had been in the basement, was now at the foot of the stairs, leaning against the wall as if it had always been there. But this time it was different. The reflection staring back at me wasn't mine. It was Adam. And this time, the smile wasn't just twisted. It was predatory, hungry. Before I could react, the air around me went cold, freezing my bones. I could feel something pulling me toward the mirror. Something from beyond, something older than the house itself, was reaching for me. In a final act of desperation, I turned and ran up the stairs, back into the suffocating darkness of the cabin. But it was too late. The house had already claimed me, and now I'm a part of it. The next guest, they will never see me coming. It's been years, or maybe just days. I'm not sure anymore. Time feels warped here. Sometimes it feels like I've been stuck in this hellhole for eternity. And then, at other times, it feels like I only just arrived. The house is my prison, my tormentor, and my keeper. I've tried everything to escape. I've clawed at the walls, screamed at the windows, and begged for someone, anyone, to hear me. But all my efforts are in vain. The cabin doesn't want me to leave. It wants me here, trapped in its web. I no longer sleep. I no longer eat. I don't need to. I simply exist, a ghost wandering through the rooms, just another lost soul consumed by the house. Sometimes I see the new guests arrive, their faces full of excitement and naive curiosity, thinking they're in for a relaxing getaway. I watch them from the shadows, just as I was once watched. I see them unpack their things. I hear their laughter, their questions to the hosts, Adam's false promises. They don't know what awaits them, and deep down I know they never will. I have become part of the cabin. The walls know me, the floorboards know my name. The mirrors reflect my face, but it's not my face anymore. It's just another piece of the house, a reminder of what happens when you get too close. Adam still comes around, though he's changed. He isn't just a man anymore. He's something darker, something ancient, something that feeds off fear. He's the true master of this place. He's the one who lures you in, the one who watches you struggle, and the one who whispers in your ear as you sink deeper into the abyss. He never leaves. He never lets go. And now, neither do I. I've been told I'm not the only one here. There are others who have come before me. I hear their voices sometimes, faint echoes in the darkness, the ones who wandered too close and got caught in the house's pull. They don't speak anymore. They just wander aimlessly, as I do. The house changes. Sometimes it feels like it's growing, expanding in ways that shouldn't be possible. Rooms appear where there were none. New doors open up only to close when you get too close. The basement? It's still there, but it's deeper now, darker, more suffocating. The mirror? It never stops reflecting new faces, new guests. I am no longer alone in this nightmare. And if you ever decide to book that cabin, that same Airbnb listing, just know this: it's waiting for you. The house isn't just a building. It's a living thing, a thing that doesn't forget. It remembers every soul that has passed through it, and it'll remember you too. The moment you step inside, you become a part of its story, and you'll never leave. I used to be Ethan, the writer. Now, I'm just another shadow in the dark, another whisper in the wind. The cabin never forgets.